I went to GDC last week, and it was really cool. I was there for 5 days, and on Monday, I was primarily at the Ed Summit, which is education for games. Lots of universities attend that have game programs. The first talk that I went to was about game programs in general and how to create one. We already have one, but I wanted to sit in on it just to see what it was about. There's some really cool takeaways. There's one book that I found called The Introduction of Color. And so I'm going to be checking that book out, and I encourage you guys to as well. What they talked about was pretty cool. The other thing that I found out is some colleges don't have integrated programs like we do. They'll have like illustration and fine art and computer science, all is completely separate departments with their own curricula and their own thing going on. And so what and they were expressing that they had trouble figuring out how to kind of connect and integrate those. And so what I thought was really cool is that we've already done that. Every discipline in the game industry is all integrated already in the School of Game Development. So that was kind of cool and reassuring to figure out. The next talk that I went to was called Teaching Puzzle Design, and it was with Jesse Schell and a couple other people. But I think you guys probably know who Jesse Schell is, and he's a game designer. He teaches at Carnegie Mellon University in their master's program. And so I'm just going to kind of go through my notes that I took down from that, because I think for game designers, it's really cool to be able to think about puzzles. Often I'll say in my feedback, hey, it would be good to add a puzzle here, but I don't really get too much in the weeds about what that is. And I'm sure you guys have all played games with puzzles. So one of the things that I thought was really good was teaching. You basically need to define terms. You need to teach players what the ingredients are and how to manage those ingredients, and create a definition for what that is. And then it's up to the player to figure out the combination of those ingredients to solve the puzzle. One of the benefits to having a puzzle in a game is that it forces players to stop and think. If you just are running and gunning the whole time, you kind of have this high energy pacing, and it doesn't really change from that. What puzzles give us, and one of the reasons that I suggest adding puzzles into levels and in games, is to change the pacing up a little bit. Instead of being fast and furious, it pulls back the energy a little bit and lets the players kind of use their mind and their kind of creative problem solving to figure out how to move forward. One of the things that Jesse talked about was, what are puzzles? Are puzzles games? And his response was that puzzles are games with a dominant strategy. Some puzzles are you walk in and you look at it and you have no idea what to do. Other puzzles, and one that Jesse brought up was as an example, is like the 15 puzzle. The 15 puzzle is really easy to get started because you just slide some things around, and then all of a sudden you're kind of like into it. You're like, oh, aha. Crossword puzzles are another example of kind of easily accessible puzzles, and Jesse argues that an easily accessible puzzle makes for a good puzzle. If it looks hard and the player doesn't really know how to get started or doesn't know where they should get started, then it puts the player off a little bit. So you want players to be able to just kind of come in and say like, oh, I know how to use these things, and start actually doing something, and then get to a point where they have to stop and think. Puzzles have progress. You start it and you move through it, and as you're doing stuff, it progresses and ultimately leads to a solution. A puzzle like a crossword puzzle, it has something that's called parallelism, and parallelism is when you there's the overall puzzle that you need to solve, but then there are little teeny puzzles. Like each little clue inside a crossword puzzle is something that you can figure out, and each of those little pieces that you figure out end up helping you get to a solution later down the road. Another example was something that, or an exercise that Jesse does in one of his classes, which we might want to take it on. I know we have classes that deal in traditional design, but what he does is he puts the students in groups, and he has them run a little campaign. And each, basically D&D, or a role-playing game, maybe they make it up, maybe they use something that's already there, but each person in the team has to take a turn being the game master or the dungeon master, and each campaign or each little segment needs to contain some sort of puzzle that causes the players to stop and think. It's not just straight up combat. I thought that was a really good example. In that same talk, Naomi Clark got up to speak, and she was talking about teaching puzzle design early in game development, not waiting to like the junior senior year to teach puzzle design, but teach it as almost like one of the first things that students learn. And I thought that was kind of an interesting takeaway. One thing that they arrived at, or that Naomi arrived at, was that that there's puzzles that don't ever have a solution. And what I thought that was interesting was it was kind of like an endless runner, but almost like an endless puzzler. And you can think of Tetris as being an endless puzzler. It gets harder and harder and harder, and ultimately, the difficulty keeps increasing, but really there's no end there. You can't solve the puzzle, but we would also argue that it is a puzzle game. One idea that Naomi had, which I thought was really cool, was that she and her students in one of the earlier puzzle design classes, they create a traditional game called beanbag golf, and the holes are basically paper plates. They cut out the hole, and students they take over the whole floor, and students put out the holes and create, like, they'll say like this hole is like 3 par, and maybe some of the holes have some rules, like the only way that you can score on this hole is you have to like bounce it off a wall, or maybe some of the holes, the hole in the paper plate's really small, and maybe in some it's really big. The idea with the beanbag golf is to give them a very simple game idea and have them make a series of levels off of it. There's a few very simple rules, and you have to throw a beanbag, you have to get it in a hole, and then students can make up rules outside of that. In terms of puzzle engines, or engines that are good for puzzle design, that are easy to get started, Puzzle Script is good for beginners, but it's too complex. And it almost kind of needs to be its own class as opposed to being incorporated into a class. There's VV, that's 6 Vs. That's a good platform for puzzle design exercises. It's very easy to learn, similar to beanbag golf. Another thing that she suggested, which I know we've integrated into some courses, was the Portal 2 level editor. It was a really simple tool that that Valve put out on Steam, where you can make Portal 2 levels really easily. It's not using the Hammer editor like they use to actually make the game, but they made a simple version of the editor.